Welcome to the Beyond the Bucket Show, a podcast centered around optimizing all life's buckets. We all have buckets we are balancing: coaching, entrepreneurial ventures, family, passion projects, and health. Let's all take this journey together and become bucket fillers. And here's your host, Chris McSwain.
Kevin Cuenca is a pretty cool guy, to say the least. He was a basketball practice player at Syracuse University, where he also attained a broadcast journalism degree. He spent 15 years as a reporter and anchor on television, finishing at the CBS affiliate in Los Angeles. Kevin won an Emmy for his sports reporting and covered 2 NBA Finals, 2 World Series, and even a Super Bowl. He is now an up-and-coming social media influencer with over 100,000 followers on Instagram. Kevin's story is amazing. We touch on several things during our conversation, from being on TV and having no money, to getting fired from CBS and starting a brand new social media career. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome to the Beyond the Buckets podcast. It is my pleasure to bring on my friend who has 112,000 Instagram followers, Emmy-winning sports reporter, workout guru, and many more titles that you hold. But welcome, Kevin Cuenca, to the podcast.
I appreciate you, Chris. Man, you got me ready to run through a wall for you right now with that intro. That was epic.
That's the coach in me. Got to inspire, but you've inspired so many. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is your nickname, White Chocolate.
Yeah.
Tell me where you got that from, because there's so many people that I grew up with that remind me of you, and a lot of them used to go by that name, White Chocolate, and they all had something very similar. But why don't you tell me how you got the origin from yours?
Well, for me, it was more of just figuring out how to make content on Instagram that was relatable to me, but still funny, and come at it in a perspective of like where people can see themselves. Like you said, you see this character in people as you grow up.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like, when I was playing high school basketball, it wasn't like I was good enough to earn a nickname back then.
Right.
But I think when we look back on those times, there's always those moments of like, well, what if coach would have played me more here? Or there was the politics with this, and if I could have just done this. There's always like these things that we romanticize as we look back, like I still wasn't 5'9", 130 pounds. Like, what the hell was I gonna do, even if I had got to start that next game or whatever?
Right.
But at the end of the day, it was just about making some fun basketball type of content, because I still love the game, and was certainly passionate about growing up. I was definitely a late bloomer, and like I was still growing until like almost my senior year of college. So I really didn't start growing until like my later years of high school, and like many people.
Yeah.
But no, it was just a way of making some content that was about basketball, but was more relatable, because there's always those like Uncle Rico types that want to think back on their high school days, and now it's obviously growing into something else through Instagram, but it really just came from wanting to create some basketball content.
Definitely. And we're going to touch on all the Instagram stuff and things like that, but let's continue to talk the hoops a little bit. Who are some of your favorite players growing up?
Well, you mentioned White Chocolate. I did really like Jason Williams.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us who looked like me at that time, because even back then, like I had the shaved head, and not that I was trying to emulate him, but you appreciated what he brought to the game. I actually thought the Kings were a much better team when they got Mike Bibby. And he was a great player, man. I think that was probably one of the guys who, in my later years, high school and early college, I tried to emulate. But, growing up, I was a Magic Johnson fan. I was a Jordan fan. I didn't necessarily have like one team. I remember rooting for the Sonics when we'd go watch them play, because at that time, from 2nd to 8th grade, we lived in Washington State. And so you had GP and Kemp and Detlef Schrempf and, the Sam Perkins. Like they had a great squad. So definitely remembered rooting for the Sonics, but they weren't my team. Like it wasn't like I was a diehard Sonics fan.
Right.
But I mean, I remember rooting for, like all the guys on the dream team. Like Barkley was fun to watch back then. And it was more just like I was really in love with the game and watching, a doubleheader on a Sunday on NBC.
Of course,
it was like, because there was no social media then. It's hard for maybe youngsters to relate at this point because there's so many other ways to get entertainment. But man, those were the
days, man. I'm just reminiscing because the Jordan documentary just dropped, and just going back and just reliving all those moments, because that was like in our adolescence. We were about 13, 14 years old, kind of when that whole thing was going on. I remember the white chocolate phase. I remember him throwing the ball behind his back and hitting his elbow, and everybody's trying to do that. The and one phase kind of went through the Allen Iverson phase. So there were so many different things. And you mentioned Mike Bibby. So I was a big fan of Mike Bibby too. He has an AAU club out in Arizona. And so he also coaches high school basketball, but my team was at the same tournament as his team. And we were going to, if things kept aligning, we were going to play each other. So I was excited. I was juiced, to play Mike Bibby's team. And Mike Bibby's team was really legit. His son was good. His son ended up playing Division I, but he stopped, either he stopped playing or transferred or something. I don't know where he's at now. They have this other kid that's getting ready to enter the draft. His name is Carlos something. He was at Washington, then went to Grand Canyon. But anyway, we play these guys, and Bibby's competitive, and he's still jacked. Like he kind of looks like you.
No, he's way more jacked now.
And he's like, and he's just going at these officials. He had his guys on the sideline, so it was just fun going at them. They ended up beating us, but it was fun just to compete with them because that's somebody that we watched.
Yeah, Bibby was a huge inspiration back then, and you saw the imprint that he left with the Kings and what he was able to do in elevating them to a point where my belief is without a couple referees, they would have beat that Lakers squad and would have went on to win a title maybe. But I remember that, if you asked me like, hey, what was your team growing up? There wasn't a team that I felt more either pride in or rooted harder for than those Kings teams. Like late in high school when you're really into hoops, and that was their peak as well. I remember being like really upset when they lost to the Lakers. That was probably the team that I rooted for the most throughout my childhood was that Kings team.
No, they were super exciting to watch. And another thing that's been exciting to watch is just seeing you grow from, a sportscaster to an online influencer. I think I mentioned that you have over 100,000 Instagram followers, and you started this thing called Cruising with Kevin. Yeah. And for those people that may not know about it, what is it? Where did it come from? I think it's really cool. It just gives you something to smile at, and I just think you do a really good job with that. So tell the people a little bit more about it.
No, I appreciate that, Chris. So a couple years ago, I was still working at the CBS TV station here in Los Angeles as a sports reporter. And every once in a while, I'd be dressed in a T-shirt or something random, going to a workout or something, and I would put a song on, and it would usually just be the radio, and I would kind of either rap to it or sing to it or whatever.
Right. And just like everybody does in their car, right?
Exactly. It's very relatable. And I would put it on Instagram, and it would people would laugh or whatever. And then one day I did one. I forget where I was driving or why I had a tie on, but I had a dress shirt and a tie on that day. And I cut the radio on, and Daz and Krupp were going back and forth, and I did the same thing I always did, and I put it on Instagram, and then Daz reposted it. And so once that happened, A, you get some followers from his page, but B, more importantly, I was able to see that it looked different than the other ones that I had done before.
And that's the key.
It looked like I was a square driving to his 9-to-5, but these gangster rap lyrics are coming out.
I love it.
So once I saw that, I was like, all right, there's something here. And I was already trying to figure out how to utilize the social media space because I was seeing how important it was when I would go to like a production house and say, hey, I've got this idea for a show. And they'd say, great, you work here, you did this, your resume looks good. How many followers do you have? And I'm like, none. I've been on this TV grind for 12 years. I don't have any. And so I saw how important it was when I first got to LA about 5 years ago. And from that, I was like, all right, I got to attack this and see what I can do. So I continued to do them every Monday and just called it Music Monday.
Right.
I would wear a dress shirt and a tie every time, so it had the same uniform look. And I would do songs that were more LA regional.
Mm-hmm.
Some stuff that you would hear on the radio, but not like Drake and Rihanna and stuff. I wanted it to be very LA when I first started. And then from there, I started doing the Bay Area songs that I knew and just started to expand it a little bit. And over 2 years, the following grew to what you had mentioned. And for me, it was like, all right, you start to do this for long enough. You see that A, at some point, things are going to kind of taper off. But B, I had built up these relationships with these different artists. I'd go to a music video shoot, or I'd go out to an event and actually get to meet some of the guys that I was doing their songs of, or they'd reach out to me like, hey, I've got this album dropping. Can you do this song? Right. And so you start to build relationships. And from that, I knew that there was potential in building upon what I've done on these Music Mondays. So that's when I started to reach out to potential sponsors. I'll get into more of it when I really announce it on my page, but essentially Cruising with Kevin will be, picking up some of these artists and doing interviews and rocking out to their music and some other music, like similar to what you've seen with, Carpool Karaoke and, James Corden and what he's done. A little bit of comedians in cars getting coffee with Jerry Seinfeld, kind of hybriding those.
I remember Steph did a Bay Area version, kind of, right? And he had Nipsey Hussle on there and just kind of got to travel and just talk. They might go get something to eat. And I just love that concept. And I think you're going to be terrific at it. Everything you do is because you go all in. That's the one thing that I really like about you. Like, if you're going to do something, you're going to go all in, and it's going to be grade A. It's going to be A+ work, and that's one of the things I really respect about you.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you saying that, and I think a lot of that comes from my Bay Area beginnings and starting at Cal High Sports under Robert Bronstein, because that job, I started out there as a freelance camera guy.
Right.
So really started to do things from the ground up. I learned how to shoot, I learned how to edit, then I learned how to report, then I learned how to host. So that way of learning the business really paid off for me, not only in the TV space, but now we're this past weekend, all I did was go through 2 years of Instagram videos and catalog them all. And now I'm starting to edit them down for TikTok. Right. But if I didn't have the experience that I have in terms of editing and stuff, I'd have to be A, creating new content, or B, passing this off hey, can you edit these for me? I don't know how to do this. And you're waiting on other people. Whereas because of the experience that I have, I'm able to do a little bit of everything, which serves me all right.
No, that, I identify with that a lot, because if there's something that I don't know, whether that be creating a website or doing a podcast or whether it be coaching, I'm always trying to figure a way out to be able to do it myself, so I don't have to really rely on anybody else to do it. And now there's people that obviously help you around, but you know how to do the nuts and bolts of the program. We're definitely going to get into your grind. And speaking to your grind, I don't know, this was when Lonzo Ball was over at UCLA. I came out with my wife, and we were going to shoot around, and my buddy had worked for the team at the time. And so all of a sudden we're on the floor, and all of a sudden I see you right next to me. We're like, hey, what's up, man? How are you? Because I hadn't seen you since the Bay Area days. And then I just see you on the KCal CBS, which was nice to see. But it just, I seen you do that so long with Cal High, but right before all of that, let's go back in time to when you were, in high school. And I know you played high school basketball, and like you said, you were a late bloomer, so you got taller later on, but you guys had a really good high school team. And from there, what was your mindset? Because did you always want to be a sports broadcaster, or what was your path after that? Did you want to continue to try to hoop? Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because taking me back to elementary school, I played a lot of video games in Washington State because it was raining all the time. So we started playing our Super Nintendo, and I started to broadcast the basketball games when I would play against my brother. And he tells me now how much it used to drive him crazy that
Right.
A, I'd be beating him in the game, and then B, I'd be like not talking shit, but essentially like I'm broadcasting his loss like right in front of him. So it used to drive him crazy.
Yeah.
But you know, at an early age, I obviously loved the game, but I recognized that there were other players that were more physically gifted than I was. And so I always think that was in the back of my mind, like, well, if I can't play in the NBA, I could still cover the NBA. But once I got to high school is when I started to take that idea more serious. I had a really great English teacher named Rich Anderson, who still teaches at Vintage High School in Napa and coaches baseball, just a great guy, and I'm still friends with him to this day. And he said, hey, if you're serious about thinking sports broadcasting might be your path, like you should think about Syracuse. And at that time, I knew of Syracuse from John Wallace and being a basketball school and Coach Boeheim, but I didn't know that it was one of those sports broadcasting hubs and one of those real powerhouses for that realm and that industry. And so I started to look into that. And you know, once I kind of keyed in on that, I don't think I ever really considered some of the other schools, like Northwestern is really good, and Missouri is really good. I never really considered them. I think maybe I was just more thinking like, all right, this is New York. I could get away and do something really different coming from Napa as opposed to like going to one of the UCs. So that ended up being, you know, my path once I was able to get in there. But you know, I loved hoops, and I really had an affinity for a lot of different sports, but basketball I was most passionate about. Was blessed to be on a really good high school team. My senior year, we won the league for the first time in like maybe 20 years, and it's funny because Vintage just won league again this past season.
Oh, really?
But now the league is completely different. Now they're playing against schools where the demographics are a lot more similar to Napa or even some smaller schools.
Yeah.
But when I was in the MEL, you know, we went up against Vallejo and Fairfield, really athletic teams that were powerhouses. I mean, I remember being a freshman at Vintage and seeing, actually this would have been 8th grade. When I was in 8th grade, and yeah, even then in my freshman year, Vallejo had Wesley Wilson, who went to Georgetown, Brandon Armstrong, who played at Pepperdine, Ty I think his name was his last name Armstrong too? Ty was a high school just hybrid athlete, played football and baseball and basketball. He was just a great point guard athlete type. CC Sabathia, the pitcher, was playing power forward for them. And then Damani Hendricks was their small forward. And so this team was just like loaded, bro. I mean, just absolutely loaded. And I remember being in like 8th grade, 9th grade, looking at these guys like, when I get older, I'm going to have to play against teams like this. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we had a guy like that by the time I was a senior, Nick Bassinger, who went on to play at Butte Junior College and then finished up at Dominican, I believe, in the Bay Area.
Yep.
But Nick was just ridiculous. I mean, he was 6'5", maybe 220, 225, kind of like a Barkley type, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Played center for us. And, you know, his skills certainly translated to the college level, but he was a different kind of player in high school because he was just so physically dominant.
Right.
Ended up being the league player of the year, and we kind of just rode his coattails to a league championship. But, you know, after that, I did have that moment. I want to kind of give a little bit of insight in case, you know, some high school kids are dealing with the same moment, which
I'm sure I know what you're going to touch on, which I know a lot of players should definitely listen to this, and parents, you know, if their kids are in the same situation. But go ahead.
Yeah, you know, my mom and I flew out. I'm really close with my mom, and we flew out to Syracuse to basically check out the campus and see, all right, I got into this school, but do I want to go here?
Right.
And we went out there, and it was one of the best trips of my life because I got out there and we were staying at some hotel off campus, and I ran into campus one evening, like after we had kind of hung out there during the day and checked things out. I went out there by myself and went to the gym, and I walked in, and like Damone Brown was in there. I'm not sure if John Wallace was in there, but
oh, really? Okay.
But like there's another dude from LA who played on Syracuse, and I can see his face. He then coached at USC, and I'll think of his name at some point, but there was multiple guys on the Syracuse basketball team just playing in the gym that night. And so here I am, a senior in high school, and I'm running up and down, and I was probably guarding like one of their friends. And I, I hit a couple shots and like, hey, you got to guard that white boy. Like, come on, man, what are you doing? And so I was literally playing pickup with these Syracuse players. And I remember leaving there thinking like, man, that was a really cool experience. And this is would be a cool opportunity. And I get there the next day with my mom, and we literally just sat down and we're like, all right, what do you think, kind of thing. And I had that moment where I thought, I could try to go play JC basketball somewhere. I was thinking about doing that in Santa Barbara. But I knew that for my career, especially at that time, now I probably would have taken a different path. But at that time, this is 2000. This is before the internet boom, and TV is really at its peak at this point. I figured, you know what? I need to get out here. I need to, if I'm going to go after sports broadcasting, I need to take it serious, and I need to really just go all in on it. That was what I felt. I knew I wasn't going to play in the NBA. And so I felt like this was my one chance to be in on professional sports. And so we had that moment where I was like, all right, do you want to do this, chase a JC basketball route, or do you want to come out here and give it all 4 years? And that's what I chose to do. I chose to go to Syracuse, and it definitely worked out in my favor, especially early on in my career. And now things have changed so much with social media that there's certainly many other routes that I could have taken to get to this point.
Right.
But knowing what I knew then and the way that just life was back then, that was the right thing for me to do. And I had a blast doing it. And I think being there all 4 years led itself to a different kind of experience than had I just came in as a junior. I think that would have been really tough because, once you're in your junior year of college, kids are living off campus. You're obviously going to meet people and have, similar interests, et cetera. But there was a certain bond that was built with, for instance, my, intramural basketball team coming in as freshmen and going up against some of the older guys. I mean, it was just a different experience going through some of that stuff. I think by junior year, you really had your friends set, and it might have been really tough to have that similar kind of experience those last 2 years had I not been there the first two. It would have been tough.
No, I like the path. I mean, there's so many things. Number one, I just think back to my high school days and just all those stories, all the people that come in and out of your life. It's really a special time, and high school players got to really embrace that time because they're not going to get it back. My team actually did a documentary. I just watched some of the proofs today, and just so many of the memories that come around, whether that be with the team or us traveling or with the coaching staff. And those are just great times. And then, when you make decisions in your life, you got to make sure that you're basically, you weigh out all the factors, but you got to go through what your heart says at the end of the day. And, there's people that want to play, people that may not want to play. If there's any type of apprehension, maybe that's nerves or whatever, but just, I would say people talk to your inner circle, your parents, before you make those decisions. Pray about it if you have a faith. But, those things are very important. And I just love hearing your old hoop stories and then seeing where you went. Through Syracuse. Sounds like an awesome experience. And then that leads to you ultimately moving back to the Bay Area and getting your first job. But you had you were part-time at Cal High, like you said early on, and then you had another job that we have in common.
Yeah. So when I first came back in 2004, I had been in touch with Robert Bronstein was at Cal High Sports. Then I also reached out to High School Sports Focus as well, because at that time the show was still going on with Mike Skloot and Brody Brazil.
Yep.
And the communication with Robert just was a lot more frequent. It's not that the High School Sports Focus guys were like, no, you don't have a chance of working here. It was more just like things progressed further and quicker with Robert. And so essentially I came back under the impression that I would work once or twice a week for Robert, shooting a game in the North Bay because he was stationed out of San Jose.
Right. So it makes it easier on him to, have you out there and film all those games because you guys are all over. And I'm sure you'll get into that. But, I mean, gosh, you guys are all over the place on a Thursday night, filming a soccer game. And then, Friday night you're doing a hoops game. Like, I have a lot of respect for you guys and what you do. And hopefully you'll shed some insight on what that actually means for people that just watch the shows or see this thing that gets produced and they don't know the insights to it. But continue.
Yeah. And so when I started doing that, but in addition to that, I was able to pay the bills because I found a job as a one-on-one aide for an autistic child. An autistic child at elementary school. He was in second grade. Yeah, third grade. And he was older than that. He was like fifth grade. I don't know why I was thinking of the age, but regardless, he needed a one-on-one aid, and I was able to help him out for a year. And once or twice a week, I'd go film I remember filming a football game at Pittsburgh High School, and that was the first time that I got one of my highlights on the plays of the week. And back then, even that was you're watching your highlights on TV. Even that was cool. I wasn't even on the actual broadcast. It was just, I'm holding the camera at that point. And even that was cool. And things progressed later in the season, later in that school year, to where I would get to report on a game, maybe once a month. I would get to cover a game and start to show some of what I could do, both in front of the camera and in voiceover.
Right.
And then at the end of that season, Scott Smith, who was the one reporter at the time, left for the Midwest. He's now a sports anchor, sports director, most likely in Tampa Bay. And he's worked in DC, he's worked in Tulsa, he's worked in some different places. And he moved on, and so I was able to take the reporter gig, and that's when the show, I believe, either that year or the following, went from a half hour to an hour, and he brought in Amy Calderon.
And that, and I'm going to stop you right there, but I want you to continue that. So check out that process for anybody that is out there and they have this goal that they want to attain, right? And they want to get on TV, and that was your ultimate goal at that time. Yeah. But you had to start part-time just filming, and then you had to have another job so you can actually pay the bills. Mm-hmm. And then you follow that up with, your opportunity comes. Basically somebody got injured or moved on or whatever it may be, and now you get your shot. It takes a lot of time for that. And, to the person that you are now is completely different than the person you were then, but your goals and aspirations, you're shooting straight at that arrow, or that target, and then you're always going to hit it. But, sometimes there's some back roads before you get back on track. And I just want everybody to understand that. And we're going to get to some more about that being broke in LA, which is another segment that you did, but continue along with the Cal High story.
Yeah, I think for me, it was just how bad do you want it? And at that time, I think it's part how bad do you want it, and then it's part just understanding the blessings that you have and showing respect to those. I say I went to Syracuse, but it wasn't just me that helped that happen and got me through that. My grandpa and my grandparents on my dad's side left us a college fund that helped me pay for it. Now, granted, I was still paying, for 10 years after I graduated college because it was expensive to go to Syracuse.
Yeah.
But, had we not had that college fund, I probably wouldn't have gone to Syracuse. I had a mom that worked really hard. My dad helped to provide for us as well. And even though they weren't, by the time I was in 8th grade, they had divorced, and their relationship was not smooth by any means growing up as a kid. But as you grow older, you understand dad did still provide for you, and he still was there, and in the way that he could be.
Right.
And so, and I had an older brother who really kept me on the straight and narrow too. So it was this village helped to raise me, and then I helped to see through some of these goals and these ambitions. But yeah, it essentially took me saying, all right, if this is what I want to do, I'm going to have to make ends meet, however, I got to make ends meet. And if it would have taken, 2 years for me to get on air, I would have still kept doing the same thing until I was able to get there.
Right.
Fortunately, Scott moved on. I was able to move down to San Jose and become their reporter. And that was awesome. Even as an anchor, and Robert does this to this day, probably still goes out and shoots games. Like, we all shot the games collectively as a unit.
Right.
And so you're shooting, lacrosse and soccer games in the cold winter months. And, you're driving in traffic for 2 hours to get to a football game. And, and then you're hurrying home to edit the highlights. And so it's definitely a grind. And, you essentially, not just in that job, but in sports reporting and for a lot of people in news reporting and doing weather, et cetera, you give up your weekends.
Yeah.
You give up your evenings because
tell me about it. I'm a coach.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, if you really want to do this, if it's something you're passionate about, you're going to do it, and you're going to show that through your actions. And, I learned a lot of great life lessons and career lessons from that time. But also was able to enjoy living in San Jose and had a small 1-bedroom apartment that, like, I thought was it. I was living large,
Yeah, for sure.
because you're 20. I was maybe 23 at that time, and so to have like my own place in San Jose and actually be on TV, like, that was a great feeling. My grandparents could watch me on the weekends. My mom and dad could watch me on the weekends. So my brother could support as well, and like, that was a thrill to be able to have my friends watch me on air on a Sunday night. Like, that was really dope. So it was a great experience, and had a lot of great times working for that show, and the different people that came through there, because there's a lot of people that came through there while I was there. I mentioned Amy Calderon, but Daniel Warnke is a guy who works about in the Midwest now, and Mike Cosina works in, I believe, still in San Jose. And there's a great Dan Harris is an awesome guy who works, I believe, at Yahoo Sports now. So it was a great group of like-minded folks that really just grinded for the essentially we were a team, and we all played our role, but we were a team at the end of the day. And shout out to Therese Vignal as well, who now works in the Giants broadcasting. So it's a cool experience looking back on those awesome times.
Yeah, it's kind of been like basically a trampoline for a lot of individuals that working for Robert. He's done a lot for so many young up and coming broadcasters, teaching them the ropes. And, you can always point to certain mentors to help you along the way. And I've appreciated him, and he's covered us a lot over the years. So many of you guys have gone on to do some really good things. So pivoting from there, you go to, or you get an opportunity to go to Texas A&M College Station and report there. Tell me what that was like. And then from there, what was your next path?
Man, it sucked, bro. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it, bro. It was, it was what it was.
Was Manziel there when you were there?
He played in that spring game, but he was behind. Ryan Tannehill was the quarterback.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so Tannehill was the starting quarterback at that time. Cyrus Gray was a running back. They had some big-time talent. Von Miller had just graduated.
Okay.
Because he came back to school for that spring game, and that was like one of my first interviews that I did.
Oh, really?
But yeah, so I went out to College Station.
And by the way, were you ever intimidated, when some of these people that you looked up to, you started interviewing them? Because now you're on the same level as far as being like peers. Yeah. Before, these were people that you always looked up to. Were you ever nervous to get in front of these people?
No, that was more, exciting. And by then I had been around enough pro locker rooms through internships and that kind of thing to know that there's going to be jerks on every team. There's going to be great people on every team. It's not about you. Just let it be what it's going to be, not to take it personal. So I knew that going in. And so I think that alleviates some of the, nervousness, because at the end of the day, people are people. You're going to meet great ones and not so great ones. But being there, I went in a little naive. I thought I was going to a, top 100 market, and cameras would be at a certain level, computers would be at a certain level in terms of quality, and the people that you're working with would be similar, driven, etc. And that I'd also be like in a newsroom setting. And when I got there, I realized very quickly that that wasn't going to be the case. Their actual main station was in Waco, which is about an hour and a half north of College Station. This is Central Texas, we're talking, where Texas A&M is, and then Waco is where Baylor University is.
Right.
But the actual place where I was working was in College Station, which they called a bureau. Essentially, the bureau was just an office building. It was literally just an office in a building. There was no newsroom set up. It was literally just a couple computers, a printer, and some cameras laying around, and hey, go figure this shit out.
Right.
That was literally it. I mean, it was like, if something's going on with the cameras, figure it out. If something's going on with the computers, figure it out. Because it was literally just myself and two coworkers as reporters. There was no engineers. There's no real camera guys. There's no news director. There's no managers. It was like, just you figure it out.
Right.
And so, that lent itself to some great opportunities, and then some real struggles. But you're making very little money.
Yeah.
And I figured out ways to make ends meet, we should say. They had a company car that you could have sworn was mine, because I was driving that thing all around town on the weekends. I was using their gas card, etc. Right?
Right. Yeah.
If I needed to go to Houston, I'm driving that car.
Right.
And I remember one day we got a call, and I get on the phone with some person at the station in Waco, and they're like, "Hey, we got this, letter from the state, and we got all these toll charges. Has anybody been taking the car to Houston?" And in Houston, it's different from California. Like, you drive on these toll roads in Houston, and basically, like, every time you got to exit, you're paying a toll. And if you don't have the money or whatever,
right.
You just essentially drive through, and they mail you the bill.
Right.
But I was driving through all kinds of tolls, bro, because I'm in Houston. I'm like, I'm not paying these tolls. And so, they're getting, all these charges are getting sent to the station. And I think I said I was, covering some soccer tournament or something, made some kind of excuse.
Yeah.
But, I figured out ways to make the most of the money that I was making, because I was probably making around 20 grand for my yearly salary there.
Wow.
And granted, it's cheaper to live in College Station.
No doubt.
Even with that said, it was I was I was living probably paycheck to paycheck. So
and the funny thing is with that, like, everybody might see you on TV, or you might post something and be like, "Oh man, Kevin's doing well," like, but they don't really understand what it is behind the scenes. Like you're driving to all these places, you're filming it, you're cutting it, you're doing it all. It's not like, hey, you just get to be on the camera and then somebody else goes and cut it. Like, that's not what happens, so it takes hours upon hours of you guys, on the field, in the field, doing the actual interviews, behind the scenes, writing the transcripts of the monologues. Like, there's a lot that really goes into it, and I don't think people appreciate that enough. And you obviously mapped out exactly what it is. Like, it's a grind. And the one thing you talked about on your pre-call, which I absolutely love, was saying you got to love it. And that goes with any walk of life. If you don't really care for it, or you go half-hearted into whatever the situation is, you're not going to be successful. But if you really love it, you're going to work for $20,000. You're going to, sit there and be the cameraman at your first job. You're going to do all these, different things to make sure that you're earning a living, because at the end of the day, you care and you love it, not like it. Those are two different things. And, that's why it ends up working out. And that job led to your next job, which you spent 5 years doing in San Antonio.
Yeah. And before that, so 2 months into my job in College Station, I'm already making my resume video. And I remember the two other female reporters who were there were like, "What the hell are you doing? Like, you just got here." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm trying to get out. Like, I'm already looking toward the next thing instead of being satisfied with where I was. And I remember maybe 7 months into that job, both of the on-air positions in Waco, which is, remember, is the actual main station. I'm just working at the bureau. The goal is to get to the main station because then you're getting more on-air experience, more live experience,
right?
And then go from there. And both the positions in Waco opened up. I of course applied, and was the only one applying that was already working for the company. And they brought in one dude fresh out of high school or fresh out of college, and they brought in another dude who was working at some smaller market. And so literally at this point, and both these dudes are younger than me. And again, I'm now taking direction. One of those jobs was a sports director. The sports director's job is to essentially say, all right, hey, you go do this, you go do this. Hey, Kevin, down in College Station, I need you to do this.
Yeah.
Well, one of those guys that's telling me what to do is 25, and I'm 29, going on 30. And it's like, you're taking instruction from this dude, man. And I had to bite the bullet. I had to like just swallow my pride and say, all right, this is what it is. And I need to just own this and get out of this situation as fast as I can. And
Sure.
That's what I did. I put my nose down. I kept grinding. I was shooting stuff on the weekends and just going above and beyond the call of duty, not for the job, but for my own resume video.
Right.
And so I was able to get my resume video to a point where A, it looked good, and B, I had enough experience at that station for San Antonio to consider me for an opening that they had.
Right.
And I was fortunate to get that job. So I moved on to San Antonio. And, soon after that, both those kids in Waco that were hired instead of me were out of the business, especially once I got to LA. So again, I think that's to say, hey, if you want something, people are going to get opportunities in front of you. You just keep grinding and you'll catch them and you'll move past them. But San Antonio was a huge blessing. I worked under Chuck McKitinick as a sports director. Hector Ledesma was also a Syracuse grad. He was our main reporter. And then we had a great camera guy named Jack Green. And the four of us had a real bond. And I got to cover, again, I was still doing high school sports and going out and covering some college stuff. But that's also when I started to cover professional athletes for the first time. I was able to go to Cowboys games, Texans games on Sundays, long days and like 17-hour days. We would drive there, cover the game, drive back. I'd be editing on a laptop on the way back.
Oh, really?
But amazing times, man. Like some of the best memories I have. And I was able to make some decent money there, start building up my savings and really just experience what life should be like for a sports reporter. You're working with people that care about the product they're putting out. You're working with good equipment, computers that work, cameras that work. Like it was a real fun gig. And I was able to be there for about 4.5 years until I felt like, all right, I've done what I can do here. And, covered the NBA finals, got to go with the Spurs to Germany, got to cover some really fun things, and just felt like, all right, this is everything that I'll ultimately be able to do in this market. Let me challenge myself again, and let's get out to LA and see if I can do that.
So that took you almost 15 years to get to that point?
No, so that at that point I had been in the business about 11. I had been at Cal High for 6, and then about 5 in Texas. So yeah, I was about 11 years into the business at that point, and just felt like I was ready for my next challenge.
So tell me about the move to LA. You just picked up and moved, or did you have a plan, or what happened?
Yeah, I had a plan. I mean, about 6 months before the move, I remember at my apartment, they were going to start increasing the rent if you didn't sign up for another year lease. And I knew, I was like, I'm not going to be here for another year. Like, let me start to figure out my exit plan here. And so, because it's A, kind of how you feel and what you want to do, and then B, like, all right, how do I get out of this contract that I'm at the station? The way that TV works is you'll sign a deal, and then like the last 6 months of the deal are what's called your outs. And essentially what that means is for the last 6 months of your contract, if a station in a bigger market, non-competing to your current station, says, hey, we want this guy or this woman, you can then start to basically figure your way out, and they're not going to hold you under any kind of penalties or whatever. Well, I was going to try to leave a month before my outs without really an out. Like when I was deciding to leave, I didn't have a job lined up. I had flown out to LA, met with some producers and different people at different stations, and just got the feeling that if I was there because of the freelance opportunities in this market, I could figure something out. Even if I was just going to be a camera guy or an editor, like I could get my way into a building and then work my way up from there.
And how much did you lean on the relationships that you've already cultivated throughout this entire 11-year process?
I honestly did not have a lot of real relationships in this market from those 11 years. What I did have was a couple contacts, and then I would just follow up through emails. And so I was, just kind of by happenstance, Jamie Maggio, who works on national broadcasts on TBS and TNT, I had met her in San Antonio, and she gave me a guy's name, Lou Cook, who worked at the CBS affiliate here in town. And he was the one who I ended up working for. But it was situations like that where it wasn't necessarily people I had physically met. It was more like, an acquaintance of a connection. And I would, just start sending cold emails. And then some of them would respond, and you just try to keep those relationships building. But essentially, I was making the decision to move to LA without having a real job lined up. And fortunately, I was able to play hardball with the people at the station, and they never ended up suing me. And because you can get sued for breach of contract if you're just leaving when your deal is not up yet. So I was a little bit fortunate to make it in that instance, but also even more fortunate because the last week I had in San Antonio, Lou Cook from the CBS called and said, hey, if you're still coming out here, we might have something for you in a freelance capacity. And I was already packing up my car to leave. So it worked out timing wise. I had a roommate situation that I could move into here in LA. And that was really all I had to work with, was like, when I decided, it was just, I have a room out there, I can go. And that's what I did. And then things started to work out from there. But even then, I mean, it was, I get to LA under the assumption that I would have some freelance opportunities anchoring and then doing some reporting on the side. Well, the lady that they thought was going to leave ended up not leaving. So I was just kind of picking up reporter scraps at that point. And, it took months for me to even get on the anchor desk. And then when I did, they had just got a new news director. And what happens a lot of times in management is I've got a sports producer who's like I'm directly answering to, but the station is still overseen by a news director and then a general manager. And they have their own connections from working in the business forever.
Right.
So this new news director comes in, and even though my sports producer is saying, hey, you're doing great, keep it up, the news director is like, I got this guy that used to work for me at this other station, I'm going to bring him in. And so, that happened multiple times where I would be working and kind of finding my groove, and then he would bring in one of his someone who he worked with, someone who worked under him at a previous station, another sports reporter, another sports anchor, and then I'd be put in the back seat again. That happened multiple times where I was demoted.
Wow.
So, and again, it was just like, all right, well, as long as I can eat and have a roof over my head, I'll be all right. And finally, maybe in year 2.5 to 3, it started to click. And by that time, that news director had gotten fired and went to another station. And our sports producer had more say in the matter. And so I was able to get the opportunities that I felt I had worked for, and started to travel with the Rams. Did that for 2 years, and got to cover NFL playoff game and covered the World Series twice. We're doing Dodger games. I'm doing Angels, Rams, Chargers, and
so cool.
Lakers and Clippers. Covered Kobe's final season. Got to cover some really cool things that I'll tell my grandkids about, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, from that, you start to see where the business is going and how social media is growing, and you start to see opportunities going to other folks. And I started to realize, like, all right, I need to really start taking social media serious as well now, in addition to, you know, figuring out things on the TV side.
Right. So you did that, and you started to dabble more in the social media, as you just mentioned. And you were working for CBS KCAL. Mm-hmm. And what was their take on the whole situation? You know, I don't know if you want to go on wax with the whole story, but
no, it's all good.
You can give your version of it, and you know, kind of how there's parameters in place that you're not doing anything wrong, but still people try to control you and what you're putting out there if it's not necessarily benefiting them.
Yeah.
So tell me about the process with them, you know, coming to you about your social media. And by the way, it's just dancing in a music video. You know, you're not showing anything explicit or derogatory or anything like that. It's just uplifting people, and it's fun.
Yeah. And see, and that's the thing. I think what I always remind myself is that any kind of art, any kind of, you know, whether it's music, TV, etc., it's all subjective. So you can take that as like, hey, this was just fun, happy-go-lucky stuff. Like, why would they be upset? Whereas some 60-year-old person at their corporate office in New York could see it and be like, oh my God, this is tarnishing our brand. This is not what we're about. Like, you got to get this guy off air. So it really is just, it's subjective. And so I knew that going in. The last year that I was with CBS, I knew that I was not going to be there for another year. And what I mean by that is not that I knew I was going to get fired. For me, it was like, I'm going to leave on my 37th birthday, which was July 28th.
Yep.
That would have been 15 years for me in the business. I would have, you know, I've covered the Super Bowl, 2 World Series, 2 NBA Finals, traveled with teams, really got to cover a lot of awesome stuff. Yeah. But I knew that my ultimate goal, and to get there, I didn't feel like another couple years of TV experience was going to help me achieve that. For me, I knew I needed to go all in on social media and continue to build up my own audience, because I had enough TV experience. I needed more of a real grip and a following that I could bring to a production company and say, hey, look, these are all the people that I can bring if we execute this idea. So, you know, I started doing those Music Mondays, you know, 2 years before that. And, you know, so for a year, it's growing up. And then I'm reaching this last year and I'm like, all right, by now the station are starting to talk about it. Coworkers are like, this is amazing. This is hilarious. We need to figure out a way to get this into our newscast, you know, and I'm not talking just like random people at the station. These are like the anchors, like the people that you see on the billboards are the ones that are saying like, this is hilarious. We need more of this, etc.
Right.
Well, but I knew all along, like all it took was one person. So you know, there's no cursing in these, there's, you know, but you know, rap music is divisive at the end of the day. Like, even if you're not cussing, I know when I cut it on to my mom's at the house, it's just the beat drives her crazy. Like, it's not even what they're saying. It's like, I can't stand that. Kevin, turn it off. Right. And so you have to going into this, like, I knew that there was always that potential. But I was at a mark where I had like 6 months left, and I had been saving up money, knowing that like at some point I'm going to walk away from what's an awesome opportunity and an awesome job, but is not going to continue to serve me in the ways that I need it to for my ultimate goals. So I was already saving up money to leave. And we're at the Super Bowl. Now, mind you, at this point, no one's ever come up to me from management and said, hey, you need to be careful and, you know, don't do this. I had gotten one message from my, at that point, former boss. My sports producer had since left and went to a different station. But when he was still with us, he sent me one message like, hey, I got this message from a coworker of ours. Just make sure you don't cuss on any of these in the future. I was like, all right, perfect. And I made sure I didn't from there on out. And so like maybe then 6 months after that, we're at Super Bowl weekend. And one of the morning show anchors, because morning shows are a little more, there's more time to fill. They're a little more silly, and they're not as like hard news, right?
Yeah.
So one of our morning anchors said, "Hey, Kev, you know, I was in Atlanta covering the Super Bowl. The Rams had just lost to the Patriots." And she was like, "Hey, can you, you know, give a rap for us or do something silly, basically?" And so I did a Andre 3000 verse for like 30 seconds, no cussing or anything. And initially the station actually put that clip on the website and was like promoting it essentially. In my heart of hearts, what I think happened is someone saw it from corporate in New York at the office, who had no connection to LA, no connection to who I am and what I was about, and said, "I don't like this. Like, you need it. What's going on with this guy? And why I've looked at his social media and he's doing this. You got to kind of wrangle this in." That's what I think happened. But essentially a couple days later, management calls you in and says, "Hey, you know, we looked at your social media. We don't think this is, can be tolerated, essentially, you know, and we're going to have to let you go." And when I knew, and the reason why I think it came from New York is because I was a freelance worker. So mind you, they're not paying my medical, my dental or anything, but in their minds and the way that their structure is set up and their rules are set up, they control your social media because you're on air. And I get it if you're, you know, on those billboards, if you are one of their news anchors every time people turn on the news and you're, you know, they're under contract and they're really like ingrained in the culture of the station. But if I'm a freelance reporter and you shouldn't be able to tell me that I can't make money off of my social media or endorse another company, as long as it's not, you know, something silly like, you know, drugs, alcohol, etc. Like one of the things that they brought up in that meeting was I had a Crenshaw backpack on, which was a fundraiser for a Pop Warner football team. That in itself is a violation because I'm endorsing a product essentially. So that goes to show you, and I just say that to show where their lines are and where their guidelines are, and how for some people's situations, I would be able to see it working, but for mine and what they were offering to me in return, it wasn't suffice. So that ultimately was like, "Hey, your social media doesn't jive with the image of the brand." And CBS is one of the more, if not the most conservative in terms of, especially in this market and in New York, it's very old school. And so knowing that, essentially they gave me a severance, which is kind of unheard of for a freelancer to get. So I know that someone locally went to bat for me and said, "Hey, if we're going to let this guy go, we got to give him something because this is kind of silly." And that's what happened. I mean, I was able to get like money that I didn't even think I was owed. And so really, to be honest with you, I would have, even if they would have sat me down like, "Hey, you're doing great stuff, but I know you're doing the social media thing. We can either give you all this money and you leave, or you can, you know, just not do your social media stuff and keep working here." I would have taken the money at that point, because just to remind folks, I was like 6 months out already. I was like, all right, I'm already gearing up to leave. So it ended up working out for me, but it was a surprise. I was not expecting to be fired, especially for, you know, at that point, getting all the support that I did from the on-air folks. It was not the kind of thing where I was expecting them to come down on it.
Yeah. Well, you know, a couple of things based on that. You're betting on yourself, you know, at the end of the day. And those are the type of people that I love, because if you bet on yourself, you can really never lose, you know. And you said, like you said, you were getting ready to leave anyway. But that was just kind of the straw that break the camel's back and puts you over the edge and say, "Hey, you know, I don't really need this." Do you miss it at all? Do you miss the on-air stuff? Do you miss the behind-the-scenes editing and being close to, you know, some high-profile athletes? Or it's kind of like, "Hey, I did that and I'm moving on"?
I miss some of the people that I worked with. And actually, I would say a lot of the people I worked with, because I worked with some awesome people. And there's a camaraderie there, you know, whether it's times in a news van or at a game or on the sidelines, etc. Really fun. But with that said, the opportunities that I have in front of me in terms of working directly with brands, creating the content that I've always wanted to create, and literally just making it myself and handing it to the people through social media, it's more than enough to remind me of why I was already planning to leave. So no, I don't miss it in the sense of like, oh man, I wish I could just go to a Laker game and, be there in the locker room kind of thing. Because I know that what comes with that is, the late nights and working on the weekends and missing out on trips and weddings and life events. Like, at some point here in the next, 7 months, I'll be an uncle. And so like, I know that all that kind of stuff, you miss out on a lot, man. You miss out on a lot of life.
Right.
Granted, what you're doing is really fun. And the memories that you're creating and the people that you work with, it's unforgettable stuff.
Right.
But you start to get to a place, I'm 37, going on 38, and you start to look at your own life and say, all right, if I want to have a wife and kids and actually be present in that household on the weekends and in the evenings, I have this chance here to go and create my own content and essentially make the life that I want to make. Or I can continue down this TV path and kind of to essentially take the easy road, and it's still going to be a grind and have its own challenges, but it's going to lead to some real bigger challenges and bigger struggles for you as a man, as a husband, as a dad, etc.
Right.
Where, and mind you, I can always, no one can take away the almost 15 years of experience that I have in that space. If I fall flat on my face and fail for the next 5 years and need to go back to that. But this is a chance for me to really take control of my life, take the experience that I have from that space and be like, all right, this served me for the 15 years that I did it, but another 5 years of it won't serve me as much as 5 years of grinding for myself and believing in myself and just going all in on this. And I'm already starting to see the potential in things, and through partnerships, through relationships. And, when you essentially make yourself the full-time job and your own ambitions, your own dreams, that full-time job, instead of giving all of that energy to a station that at the drop of a hat can fire you for anything, it feels more rewarding. And it also, I feel like, is more impactful for your own life. Now, not everybody wants that. Like, some people want the security and like, hey, I'd rather have my benefits and just, be content with that. And others have family responsibilities, so they can't go all in on themselves. Like, dude, I gotta, my wife is doing this and my kids are going through this. Like, I've got to be able to A, provide for them, but B, have the health insurance and the dental, et cetera. Like, some people need that, and I understand that. But for me and my own, and I think if I can leave folks with anything, it's that. It's like, really find out what your truth is and not worry about what makes you cool to others, what makes it look like you're killing it to others. Because right now, if I was to go, to a high school reunion, for instance, or go on Facebook, etc., what I was doing a couple years ago is more impressive than where I am right now. Like, I know where I'm going to be in 2 more years, and it's going to blow that out of the water.
Right.
But you have to be okay with that. Like, I'm going to take a step back. It's going to look much less impressive to my mom, to my close friends, but it's going to be a lot more impressive to me and my inner core and my heart, because I know where I'm going and I know what it's going to take to get there. And that's you living in your own truth.
And that's what a lot of this show is about, finding out who you are. There's so many buckets that we all have to fill, and you've done so many different buckets, and now you're getting ready to go into another one, and you've already started it. But I'm excited to see where that creative mind is going to take you, because right now it started as you dancing on a Monday in your car, right? But I've already started thinking, because I'm a creative person like you, where it's like, already know what this is going to lead to. It's going to lead to some very high level conversations with people we might not know of in the music game. And then a few years later, we're going to see them make it big or whatever it may be. Like, that's where people only have blinders on a lot of the times, where they're like, I can only see right here. And that's to your point earlier about what other people are seeing outside, and it doesn't really matter as long as you're comfortable with it, as long as obviously you're not hurting anybody by doing what you're doing, and you're not. And that's the beautiful thing about creative individuals like yourself, and where this is going to lead. And I'm excited to see, I can't wait to see what's next for you, because everything you've done it at a high level. You take steps forward, sometimes you take steps back, but you're always on the search for being better and better and better. And for anybody listening to this, that is what life is all about. Are you comfortable with who you are? Are you comfortable with continuing to grow? I learned this from one of the previous podcasts. One of my mentors, Ron Felice, said, we're all like trees. We're either growing or we're dying. And I'm not done living. And it was a profound quote that he said, and I'm always going to remember that. And that's been the cool thing. I've learned so much from our talk today. I've learned so much from all these other talks, and just positive people, man. You're gonna kill it. I know you're at 100,000 now. Let's hope to get to you to 200,000 and then 1 million, and everybody can kind of see what you're doing. But as we wrap it up, tell me a little bit about what your goal is for the creative side that you're trying to produce out there, because you're trying to get this content out for people to be entertained. But I also know that you kind of want a good message along with it, because the dancing got you in the door, and now I want to know what's kind of behind the door.
Yeah. So for me, touching on what you just said, it's being comfortable, being uncomfortable. It's comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's that notion of, all right, things aren't where I want them to be, but I can sit in this and be just fine. Everything can be on fire around me, and as long as I see where I'm going, I'll be all right. For me, it's about working with brands that make sense and are positive and have good things going, and I'm not talking about partnering up with beer companies and stuff like that. It's about being true to myself, but partnering with the right companies that essentially see a vision. And so I knew that right away, if I could get a car company to get on board, it would put me in a position to sell the daily driver that I had, so it would work out for me financially. But more importantly, it would add some credibility to what I have going on. And so I started, just like I did with stations, I started hitting up companies, Audi, Mercedes, Ford, Porsche, etc.
Yeah.
And I was able to get in touch with a great person at Genesis, which is like the luxury version of Hyundai.
Yeah.
And he saw the vision. And so now I have a new Genesis car, and as their new models drop, they will come, I'll be able to get one as well. And essentially it's, putting artists, musicians, athletes, influencers, comedians in that car with me and doing a real interview, but also rocking out to some songs. And I want to do, kind of more in the line of the white chocolate stuff, is doing some sports content where you're getting to know which athlete loves this game or this sport. All right, well, let's compete against each other too, after we find out about where your love for that game or that sport comes from.
Right.
So, and that will be another thing that I'll have to, partner up with companies for us. But essentially what social media has allowed me and other folks to do is we're able to create what we want to create and partner up with brands who essentially are endorsing and advertising through you that see the vision as well. And much like, Robert Bronstein used to spend hours selling that show, selling Cal High Sports to the different sponsors for the whole time I was there. I mean, he was the advertising department. He grinded. And so I saw what he had done in terms of bringing in sponsors for that show to keep it And some of them came in knowing that like they might not get the return on their investment financially, but they believed in him, they believed in the product, and they believed that it made an impact in a community, which could then come back to them.
Right.
And so essentially that's all I've tried to do with this is go along those same principles, same kind of like, all right, well, I'm going to sell this tape out of my trunk, like 40 and Too Short and these different dudes from the Bay who came up, Mac Dre, as these independent artists, where essentially you're just believing in yourself and you're saying, all right, I know I can create some dope content. Which one of you companies believes in me? Or which one of you advertisers believe in me? So that's really what it comes down to, is like creating the stuff I want to create, aligning myself with the brands that will help me make ends meet financially, and knowing that there's real power and financial opportunity in that. Like if you can really create great content and work with sponsors and have it look a certain way, and you know, that's when platforms start calling. That's when, you know, like just recently on forgetting their name, but Gilly the Kid and Wallow 267 on Instagram have a podcast of their own, and it's on, I think Barstool Sports just bought them, but it's like you're talking millions of dollars for that content, for that audience, and to align themselves with their brand. And so there's enough evidence around us to see what's possible when you believe in yourself. But what's tough is in the meantime, being okay with not looking like you're the coolest dude on the block to your peers, and also our own inner voices. Then don't ever stop. And I literally continually tell this to myself, and hopefully this helps someone at home, which is, you know, essentially I'll say, you're almost there, Kev. I love you, Kev. Because a lot, like I'm living by myself. And so you go through these moments where like, man, should I really left?
Yeah.
Or should I have really done this to get fired? Or should I really be doing this? Like,
no doubt.
You have those moments of self-doubt, which they're human nature. You're going to go through them. But as long as you don't sit in them, and as long as you wake yourself up right away, like, don't even let that come into your mind. It's going to come, but you're almost there. I love you. Keep grinding. If you can instill these little sayings to yourself that you're probably not going to hear from people around you unless you like have someone right on your hip 24/7. Like there's going to be these moments where you're by yourself and you're dealing with self-doubt, or you're dealing with these challenges internally. But as long as you can hold yourself accountable and be comfortable being uncomfortable and just grind through those moments, you're going to get to that other side.
Right.
And
no, man, that's beautiful. I mean, I can resonate with that same thing. You know, before I started full-time teaching, I was always coaching, but I had a sales job, and I did this sales job for 9 years, made a lot of money, drove nice cars, was afforded, you know, to buy a home early on, before age 30. And that doesn't really happen in San Jose. And
especially not now.
Definitely not now. And something just kept pulling me to this. You're not happy. Go and coach and teach. And I had got my master's as well. So when the time came, you know, a job opened up at Valley Christian on the teaching side. I was already the coach. Then it opened up. I was like, all right, I got to take it. You know, here's my opportunity. And you know, there's many times where I'm like, man, do I need to leave? Is my family going to be okay? And we're still okay 7 years later. And we're doing just fine, you know? So it just goes to show, lead with your heart, everything else will follow. But just remember, like, you put in reps. Like that's the one thing people don't really know is like, before you started buzzing, you know, online and on Instagram and social media, like you put in reps. You put in 15 hard years of broadcasting. Like you're not a novice at this, right? And so this is just a different pivot in your life, a different bucket that you're about to fill. But man, it's been great. I know we could do this all day. But I really appreciate you coming on the show. We got to do this in person. I'm looking forward to seeing what you got next, man. And again, thank you, my friend.
Chris, no, I appreciate you having me. This was awesome just to kind of go down memory lane. It's fun from time to time. So glad we were able to do this, and keep up the great work, man. Like, you have a real natural flow to the way that you hold these conversations, where it doesn't even really feel like an interview. It just feels like a conversation. So
yeah,
keep knocking this out of the park.
Definitely.
And growing with this. And what's cool too is you'll start to see, and this may be something you've already thought about, but like, I started to reach out to some of the players that I covered during my time at Cal High Sports. Juan Anderson, who's now with the Warriors.
Mm-hmm.
There's different players who've come along, like Drew Gordon is playing overseas. Aaron Gordon was I want to say he was in 9th grade when I was leaving, but you already saw that he was going to be a monster.
Yeah, you knew.
Yeah. And so, like, you cover these guys and you're around them as you're growing through your profession. And you'll be able to do the same with your podcast, where years from now, you're sitting down with these guys who are going to be, big time NBA athletes or professional athletes and in different careers as well, and excelling. And you get to have these real heart-to-heart conversations with them because you've put in your grind and your hours and your years. So keep killing it. Keep doing what you're doing, man. It's fun to see everyone find their path.
Definitely. Thanks, my brother. We will chat soon.
You got it, Chris. Take care, brother.
Thank you for listening to the Beyond the Buckets podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share the show with your friends. And until next time, take care.